Well, of course, I'm an economist, and I don't give much in the way of economic analysis and theory. And what would I do if I had all power tomorrow? You'd probably be frightened to death, but let's think for a minute. I don't think income tax is efficient, effective, or even fair. So I would get rid of income tax altogether. Instead, I would find government revenue from what used to be called death duty, a rather heavy tax on transfer from one individual to another. And one would need to go into the details of that because one doesn't want to discourage charitable enterprises that are a blessing to society in general. But we don't want to be a party to privilege that's in a sense not earned. So, to replace income tax, I would have an increase in what we call GST, or in Europe, VAT, value-added tax, that sort of thing, and a tax on transfer of estate at death. It's one thing to argue that returns to enterprise should be rewarded. It's another thing to argue that children who already have an incredibly privileged start in coming from a wealthy home need further benefit in handouts of cash from the parent on death or before death. So if you gift something to your son, daughter, well, there's an estate duty to pay, just as if you just died. There's no reason why you should inherit a family estate. Land belongs to the people, and ownership of property is the reward of being of value to society. Children haven't been of value to society. They're children. If they want to earn a good standard of living, they can go and do it, and they have a privileged start because of the parents they come from. And no doubt a great deal of resources will be poured into them in order to give them a good start. I would increase rates carefully across regions, cities, towns, and so on, so that the value of land, if you like, per hectare or per acre, is equalized towards an equality across the country, which means land on very valuable sites is rated very highly, very high rates, and land on marginal, submarginal, has a low rate, even approaching zero, depending on how much revenue is needed, of course. I would have a rule that the state always has the right to buy at 5% above the market price. I mean, I take 5% out of a hat, we could say 10%, but 5% probably do. If you've declared on your tax return that you sold such and such a property at $1 million, and the rating authority considers it's worth more than that, or you declared that the value of well, let's not say that for the minute. That's just one thing at a time. If society wishes to buy that property, it can buy it compulsorily at 5% more than you received for it from the present owner. This makes sure that there's no secret deal that it's said that I sold it for $1 million, but in fact he paid me $2 million for it. The deception is heavily punished, if you like, heavily taxed. So if you declare on your tax form that this asset or this property is market value has fallen to so and so, and therefore you've made a loss this year, then the state, of course, has a right to buy at 105% of what you've declared. Valuation of the asset is as on your tax claiming form. This makes it so you cannot just write off assets and dodge the capital gains rates, the rates accordingly. There's no income tax, so we're not bothered about whether you're hiding what you're earning. And of course, there's a benefit that all citizens receive, perhaps all residents. That is a reasonable standard of living above what we consider to be poverty, for certain. And possibly rather better than that. Some particular percentage of what the average standard of living is for the country. Benefits are to be inflation linked, but really if we have this standard of living minimum wage that everyone receives as a benefit, regardless of whether they're working or not, or whether they're wealthy or not, it's just everybody receives it, then we don't need to worry about declaring what your actual income is from work, and we don't need minimum wages and imposition of those. You can leave that to the market. If you're willing to work for $5 an hour to cut your neighbour's hedge, well, fine. You still receive your national benefit wage on top of whatever you might earn. Oh, when it comes to the GST, we might want to make exemptions on GST that we're of products and services that we're wanting to encourage. We might feel that even with the state wage, we want to subsidise organic food for the health of the nation. We might want to put a heavier tax on carbon fuels. Across the board, because transport perhaps shouldn't be powered by the oil industry and so on. So we want to discourage it to some extent. Might want to discourage alcohol and tobacco in that way. I'm not certain about the ethics of imposing, if you like, good behaviour by the market. Inducements, encouraging, you could say. I think we may have persecuted smokers too much. I'm not sure about the ethics of how high you should push tax on alcohol. I'm not clear in my mind the ethics of allowing drugs or not in a culture. I suspect these evils are a function of a lack of care of our citizens. And to hit them on the head for our lack of care being expressed in chronic addictions is not the way to go. We should be taking more care that people's lives were quite simply joyful enough not to need such addictions. This may be a foolish ideal that just cannot be attained, but I don't know. I would get rid of limited liability. You're liable for your contracts. You can't escape it by saying, well, I've only risked this. No, you are responsible for what you owe. If you're a shareholder in a company, then you owe part of its debts. The company goes bankrupt, so to speak, upside down, then it's not that the creditors are just told hard luck. They can come to you for the debt because you have authorized it in being an owner of the company. You are not protected in your risky ventures from the consequences of the risk. You put other people's lives, welfare at risk. You must pay up. And until you pay up, you cannot keep ownership of other assets that would pay. Such assets are taken in payment of the debt. In other words, we want shareholder responsibility in what they supposedly own. If you own it, you own the benefits and you own the losses. The suppliers to your firm do not take the risk of trading with you. You take the risk of not being able to pay your debts and losing other assets that you have accordingly. We come now from fiscal to monetary policy. Banks are not allowed to create money, only the government. If there is to be benefit from inflationary monetary policy, then that benefit should be to the nation, not to the bankers. Governments determine the money supply. Mortgages. We have a bizarre situation with mortgages where you as a householder commit to a debt the price of which, the interest rate, is unknown into the future. You promise to pay what the mortgage company declares is the rate that you should pay it in the future, as the future comes. No way, not putting up with that. Mortgage company is willing to lend at a certain rate of interest for a certain specified period. You agree to it, you agree to pay that rate, not more, not less. Actual rates therefore adjust accordingly to how the parties take this situation. We cannot tolerate the householder finding he's got to pay 3 times the interest rate that he took when he first borrowed. If you're willing to lend it now at 2.5%, it's 2.5% for the N years that you've decided to lend it, and the rate at which he pays it back, and so forth. It's all absolutely clear what he's committing to. And what you're committing to as well, of course, as the lender. We have a system in banking where we borrow short and lend long, on the understanding we can go to the central bank to bail us out if we have a liquidity problem. Not on. What you lend must be matched by what you own in assets that can be liquidated to provide the loan. In other words, you risk the loss, not someone else that's lending to you. The central bank is not there to bail you out with liquidity problems. If you borrow from the central bank, your assets are lodged with the central bank. And if you've already given them away in the form of providing mortgages to people, then you don't have the assets to borrow from the central bank. Let me return to another point, that the concept of taxing profits. Profits are the payment to making good decisions and taking the risk. In some sense, it's the appropriate reward for such. I don't see the rationality of taxing profits. If you say it's a necessity, I want to know what the gains are from this necessary cost to us all in avoiding appropriately risked increases in our welfare, matched by the profit earned. I mean, unless you think that the particular enterprise is monopolistic, cartels, rigging the market. Well, if you think that's the case, then the best option is always to have it that the state can become a competitor in the market. In the market. If you think oil companies are rigging the market, there's a state oil company as well that competes in the market and refuses to sell at unreasonably high price. So the other company's cartel is broken. End of story. In fact, you don't even have to go that far. The sheer threat of a government company public company being set up competing with you, by public I mean publicly owned company, nationalised if you like. But I'm not nationalising the whole industry, I'm just threatening it. You want to compete with a government that's being fair when you're not? I don't think so. Perhaps we'll moderate our prices a bit so that the government are not breathing down our neck. And I'd like to return to wealth tax. I'm aware that, in a sense, wealth tax is likely to transpire as a profit tax. I don't think that the individual is personally tremendously motivated to leave one's children at present double the billionaire fortune that they're going to inherit anyway, which of course I would tax, as you know. So I don't see death duties as a serious threat to profits. The willingness to seek after profit. But if I do feel that we have to have a wealth tax, and I'm not sure as it's made less necessary by simply having a estate duty, death duties. These vast fortunes are knocked on the head in the long run anyway. And of course, man is not terribly concerned with the long run. He's concerned with the next 5, 10, 20 years at the most. Whereas the incredible fortunes that are built up are the product of very long-term inheritance, aren't they? In large measure. But there are, in the modern world, increasingly very notable exceptions where individuals that start in a garage end up being one of the great entrepreneurs in the world and so on. Well, if you do feel the desirability of having a profit tax, then we go back to the asset rule. If you declare your assets have dropped in value this year and therefore you shouldn't be paying, any wealth tax, or far less because they're worth much less, well, the government has the opportunity of buying those assets at 5 or whatever it is, 10% more than your declared valuation of the asset on your form. End of story. Makes you very realistic about what you price your assets at. Well, there's a lot that can be done from an economic point of view if you really wanted to make society, well, quite honestly, a better place. And I'm pretty sure there is the will in a society to do it, but not by those that make the decisions about such at present, of course. And I'm not advocating some revolution to bring it about. Revolutions are extremely uncertain in outcome and usually devastating as regards welfare and happiness of whole generations of people in the meantime, suffering or performing or carrying out the revolution and its consequences. Doesn't look like a good way to go to me. So, ideas they may be, and you might pick up on one or two, but I don't think it's what this world is about at present. We have the systems, economic, social and political, that we have. And, well, the reform of the individual, our very selves, may be a far more realistic priority than the eternal argument about changing society. So, now you know why I don't talk about economic reforms or political revolutions or societal changes that could be made for the better. Because I think the changes we can make in our own personal lives are far more important from the point of view of our personal happiness. Far more. You know, we blame our problems on the external constraints. My society doesn't give me these opportunities and doesn't help me with so-and-so and is restricting and horrible in the following ways. But it's nothing to the restrictions we're putting on our own life and the consequences in our lack of joy and peace and welfare, spiritual, mental, and physical. That I really feel, thank God, is the truth of the matter. And that is what's in our hands, that we can change at one stroke. And that is just wonderful. Thank you, Heavenly